The sky over Los Angeles was strangely overcast that day, as if the entire city were holding its breath, waiting for an emotional explosion that no one could stop. Deacon stood in his familiar apartment, once a refuge from judgment, but today everything felt cramped and stuffy. An invitation lay open on the table, the gold lettering reflecting the faint light from the window. Taylor had received one like a Forrester Foundation fundraiser, where their glamorous worlds would collide, where every eye would be scrutinized and every gesture could be a weapon. They had agreed, long ago, to keep their distance, that what was between them would exist only in quiet moments, where no one would see, where their hearts could breathe just a little. But fate, like a melodrama addict, always found a way to push them in the same direction. Deacon tried to bury the emotions he thought he had under control, but every time he saw Taylor, everything exploded. She walked into the auditorium that day with her signature calm demeanor, but behind those deep eyes was a storm. They met at the entrance, just for a brief moment, but that look was enough to freeze time. They say there are connections that don't need words, just presence. And when the photographer started to pan, fate decided to capture the moment they couldn't control. Deacon stood close to Taylor, shoulder to shoulder, eyes meeting in a line that held more than 1,000 confessions. Flashes rang out repeatedly, white light cutting through the air like lightning in a storm. A brief moment, but enough to set the entire city ablaze. The photo appeared online less than an hour later. Headlines raced across the news, accompanied by vicious commentary, speculation, and familiar names were drawn into the vortex. Ridge, Brooke, Steffi, Hope, all witnesses to an emotional earthquake no one was prepared for. Brooke saw the photo in her office, her hand shaking, causing her coffee cup to fall to the floor. Ridge, who had always believed his past with Taylor was closed, felt a wave of anger rise up in him, not from jealousy, but from the betrayal of someone he had always considered a beacon of hope. Steffi was numb, while Hope, who had believed her father had truly changed, stared at her screen, torn between love and disappointment. Meanwhile, Deacon sat alone in a closed bar, his phone glowing with hundreds of unread messages. He knew the storm was coming, but he felt a strange, painful, yet liberating feeling. He was tired of living in secret, tired of pretending not to feel anything when Taylor walked into the room. But the photo was more than a stolen moment. It was an exposure, a confession, a light that illuminated everything they had tried to hide. Across town, Taylor was in the same panic. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, trying to figure out who the woman staring back at her was. Doctor, mother, friend, or betrayer. The phone kept ringing. Steffi, Ridge, Brooke all wanted answers. But Taylor had nothing to say. She knew any excuses were meaningless. She had healed people, spoken of honesty and dignity, but now she was trapped in her own emotional quagmire. The mental walls she had built up all her life were crumbling. She remembered the moments with Deacon, the compassionate looks, the careless touches, the nights they would just sit in silence and hear each other's heartbeats. She knew it wasn't a sin, but it couldn't be salvation either. They met again later, not to talk, but to face the consequences. Taylor looked at Deacon, seeing a strange mixture of exhaustion and courage in his eyes. He didn't apologize, and she didn't blame him. They both knew what had happened couldn't be hidden, but it couldn't be erased either. The storm had swept them into the public eye, where everyone was watching, where everyone who had trusted them had turned their backs. Brooke and Ridge were at the opposite ends of the spectrum, one believing it was an unforgivable betrayal, the other seeing only evidence of the fragility of human emotions. But amid the criticism, there were those who saw something else to wounded souls seeking a little peace in this fake world. Deacon began to realize that sometimes being true to one's feelings was scarier than being criticized. He had thought love could be extinguished with reason, but the more he tried to suppress it, the more fiercely it burned. Taylor was torn between duty and heart, between the image of a proper woman and a woman who just wanted to be loved without judgment. She heard the gossip every time she walked out, saw the prying eyes in the hospital, saw her daughter's disappointed look. But in the dark, alone in the empty room, she still heard Deacon's breathing echo and knew that she could not deny it. The wave of public opinion did not stop. The photo was printed in magazines, enlarged, cut close to the two faces. That emotional gaze became proof of a forbidden relationship. Entertainment programs talked, interviews exploited, sensational headlines. Taylor betrayed Ridge. Deacon went back to the wrong path. Logan family broken again. Each line was a knife cut deep into honor, into memory, into trust. But in the midst of it all, Deacon saw one thing clearly. He no longer wanted to hide. He didn't want to live as a shadow, only apologizing for his own feelings. One afternoon, as the last light fell on the familiar streets, Deacon drove to Taylor's house. He didn't go in, just stopped across the street, looking out the window. She was sitting in the chair, the light reflecting off her tired but strangely beautiful face. He knew that if he walked through that door, things would never be the same again, but if he left, he would forever live with a void that could never be filled. The wind blew hard, swirling dry leaves into spirals like a symbol of taunting fate. He closed his eyes, listening to his heart beat. Somewhere inside him, a voice rang out. People can hide from the world, but they can't hide from themselves. And when night fell, Los Angeles still glowed with thousands of lights, but in those two hearts, there was only one fire, smoldering, uncertain, but unquenchable. Will they be brave enough to cross the line, to be true to what is burning inside, or will they choose to step back once more, letting the world define them with cold judgments? In the darkness, that question echoes, like a wordless refrain, waiting for an answer that perhaps they themselves do not dare to face. Deacon had never believed silence could be so violent. It fell on him the moment the phone slipped from his hand. The moment the words Taylor and Sheila, car crash, explosion lodged in his brain like shrapnel. For a fraction of a second the world bent inward, folding him into a place without air, where every heartbeat sounded like an echo inside a tunnel. The television in the bar kept flickering with meaningless images, laughter, music, lives that still continued somewhere else, while his own felt sliced open. He could not move, not even blink, because the weight of what had happened pressed against his ribs until breathing itself became betrayal. Taylor, the woman who had managed to make him believe in beginnings again, after years of living in the ruins of his own mistakes. And Sheila, the shadow that had haunted every flicker of light he tried to build. Both names tangled now in one sentence of death, one twisted wreck of fate. Outside, the city kept moving, oblivious. Rain gathered in the gutters, sliding like tears down the glass. Deacon's reflection stared back at him, pale and disoriented, a man who looked as if someone had pulled the ground from under his feet. He remembered the way Taylor smiled just a day before, the way her voice steadied his chaotic pulse. Love had always been foreign to him, fragile, something he could only watch from a distance. Yet she crossed that boundary, fearless, patient, as if her presence could rewrite his past. Now that same love had been pulverized in metal and fire, twisted by the one person who could not stand to lose control. Sheila had been the storm circling them for weeks. Her jealousy, once disguised as maternal concern, had grown teeth. She had warned Taylor to stay away, spoken of consequences that sounded like riddles until they materialized in smoke and flame. Deacon replayed every moment, the glare in Sheila's eyes when she realized Taylor had taken the piece of his heart she could never own. It was obsession disguised as affection, and now it had turned homicidal. The police report said Sheila was driving, speeding through the wet highway, screaming at Taylor to listen, to understand. Taylor must have tried to calm her, maybe even reached for the wheel when Sheila pressed harder on the gas. The impact had been instant, but the aftermath and inferno that consumed everything lingered like a curse over his soul. In the wreckage, 2 bodies were found unrecognizable, fused into something beyond humanity. Deacon could not comprehend it. He saw the images in the report, blurred, censored, but enough to tell him what he already knew. Love had cost Taylor her life. The irony gnawed at him. She had spent years healing others, saving strangers from despair. Yet she could not save herself from the madness of someone who once claimed to love him too. Sheila had wanted control, not companionship. She wanted to own every ounce of his loyalty, even if it meant erasing the one woman who could free him from her grasp. Guilt slithered into Deacon's chest like smoke. If he had cut Sheila out sooner, if he had refused to answer her calls, if he had chosen caution over compassion, would Taylor still be alive? Every if became a blade carving deeper into his conscience. He had thought he could manage Sheila, temper her volatility, keep her tethered to sanity by offering crumbs of sympathy. But he underestimated the hunger of a broken heart. When obsession meets rejection, it ignites. And this time, the spark had ignited a tanker truck filled with fuel, a literal embodiment of every destructive impulse that had ever lived inside Sheila Carter. The world learned of the explosion within minutes. News anchors called it tragic, authorities called it preventable, but Deacon could only call it his fault. The police mentioned skid marks, evidence of reckless speed, witnesses hearing a scream before the blast. He imagined the moment right before impact, Taylor gripping the dashboard, realizing that Sheila wasn't just angry, she was ending everything. The blinding light, the deafening roar, the final breath she never got to take. Days blurred. Deacon wandered through them like a ghost. He visited the crash site, where the highway still bore the blackened scars of flame. The smell of burnt rubber mixed with rain and fuel made him dizzy. He stood there until the wind cut through his jacket, staring at the twisted remains of a guardrail and wondered how something so strong could bend so easily under pressure. He felt the same. Inside him, Something had bent too far and snapped. In the quiet of his apartment, he replayed the last night he saw Taylor. The way her hand brushed his as they walked out of Il Giardino, the soft warmth of her laughter. She had told him not to let guilt define him. How cruelly prophetic those words now sounded. Everything around him carried her imprint, the coffee mug she used, the faint trace of her perfume that refused to fade. Each reminder was a dagger coated in memory. But grief never comes alone. Alongside it, suspicion began to crawl out of the cracks. The explosion had been too violent, the reports too rushed. Some officers whispered that the fire had burned unusually long, as if accelerated by something more than gasoline. Others questioned why Sheila's car had veered into the truck's lane when she knew that road better than anyone. It wasn't just a collision, it was a statement. Deacon started to wonder whether Sheila had planned not just to die, but to make her death unforgettable. A final performance of destruction meant to bind him to her forever through guilt and loss. As the media frenzy grew, so did Deacon's paranoia. He began noticing shadows outside his window, anonymous calls that disconnected when he answered, voices in alleys whispering names he shouldn't hear. Was it imagination, or was someone ensuring that the story remained exactly as written? He knew Sheila's network extended further than anyone realized. If she had accomplices, if this accident was staged, then Taylor might have been collateral damage in a much larger game. The thought chilled him, yet it also ignited something dangerous inside. The will to find the truth. He started investigating quietly, retracing Sheila's steps, pulling surveillance footage, talking to anyone who saw the car before it exploded. The more he searched, the more contradictions surfaced. Sheila's bank account had been emptied days before. Her phone pinged from a different county 2 hours after the supposed time of death. Was she alive? The question festered like poison. If Sheila had faked the crash, if Taylor's body had been misidentified, then Deacon was living inside a nightmare designed by the one woman who thrived on chaos. Sleep abandoned him. Every night he dreamed of Fire Taylor calling his name through smoke, reaching out, vanishing just before he could touch her. Every morning he woke drenched in sweat, unsure what was real. The line between morning and madness blurred. He found himself returning to the highway again and again, as if the ashes could speak. Each visit left him more hollow, more certain that closure was a lie. As weeks passed, the official investigation closed. To deaths, accidental cause, case archived. But Deacon couldn't accept it. The absence of proof felt louder than evidence itself. Taylor's ring, the one she never took off, was never recovered. Sheila's dental records, incomplete. The coroner's report, partially redacted. Secrets hid inside the paperwork like ghosts behind frosted glass. The world moved on, but Deacon stayed trapped in that moment of ignition, a man orbiting ground loss, unable to escape its gravity. His guilt mutated into obsession. He began keeping a journal of patterns, license plates that appeared too often near his home, strangers who lingered outside the restaurant, packages left without senders. One night, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside, a single photograph, the crash site, taken after the fire, and in the corner of the frame, a woman's silhouette walking away. The image was blurry, but familiar. The tilt of her shoulders, the cascade of hair. It could have been anyone, nor it could have been Sheila. The handwriting on the envelope matched hers. Deacon's sanity frayed. He felt watched, manipulated, tested. The possibility that Sheila had survived became an infection in his mind. If she lived, then she had sacrificed Taylor deliberately, turning the woman he loved into a symbol of punishment. The thought drove him to extremes. He began chasing leads across counties, confronting mechanics, officers, anyone who might know more. Each dead end only deepened his desperation. He drank to quiet the noise, but found that the alcohol amplified it. One stormy night, he returned to the crash site again. Lightning split the sky, revealing the charred guardrail like a scar across the earth. He sank to his knees, rain soaking through his clothes, and whispered Taylor's name to the wind. For a fleeting instant, he imagined her standing there, alive, forgiving, telling him to let go. But the thunder swallowed her voice. When he looked again, the silhouette was gone. He knew then that closure would never come from acceptance, it would come from truth, however brutal. Somewhere between love and madness, someone had rewritten fate, and Deacon intended to tear that page back open. Whether Sheila was dead or alive no longer mattered. What mattered was the reason, the pattern, the unseen hand guiding every tragedy that touched his life. As dawn broke, he stood amid the rising mist, a lone figure drenched in rain and determination. The highway stretched before him like a vein leading into the unknown. Behind him, the world believed in endings ahead. He saw only unfinished business. And as the first light touched the scorched asphalt, a single question echoed in his mind, cold and merciless. If Sheila truly died in the fire, then who standing in the shadows that morning was wearing Taylor's necklace?